Okay. The 27th of June 2017. This was the day when my whole world was flipped upside down. I travelled to my local hospital and entered a room preparing for my telehealth conference with my dad and my boyfriend, later to become my husband, beside me. It was on this day when I was told a phrase that I will never forget. Your results are positive for Huntington's disease. I still remembered that moment so vividly. My whole body went numb and my mind began rushing with endless thoughts. The room fell completely silent. I couldn't even look at my dad or my boyfriend. I just felt frozen with my eyes locked on the TV screen. I was thinking things of what my life will now be like. For those who don't know, Huntington's disease, commonly referred to as HD, is a brain disorder caused by a defective gene in the DNA instructions called Huntington, which causes nerve cells in the brain to break down over time and deteriorates a person's physical, mental, and emotional abilities. All children born from a parent has a fixed 50% chance of inheriting the gene, and symptoms start presenting at different ages depending on the gene, although it is most common between the ages of 40 to 55. Though it can also occur in children, known as juvenile Huntington's disease. My Huntington's journey begins with my grandfather and his family. It's believed my grandfather inherited HD from his father, my great-grandfather. However, this was never being able to be confirmed as he passed away before any symptoms arose. In the 1980s, my grandfather's brother became symptomatic and was the first known person to have Huntington's in my family. By the 1990s, my grandfather and his sister also developed symptoms as well. It was at this time when my family and parents both learnt about HD and understood that my mum and her siblings were at risk. My parents contacted Huntington's Queensland seeking advice on how they could explain my grandfather's HD symptoms to two young children. As a young girl, I originally just thought my grandfather was sick due to his old age. It wasn't until my parents explained that his hand movements weren't controllable, which allowed me to understand. While I was still in primary school, I watched my grandfather's health deteriorate to the point where he had trouble with everyday life. My family decided to reach out to Huntington's Queensland again, seeking support, advice, and tips. They learned valuable information like the different stages of HD and some quality of life tips like using plastic cups with lids to avoid spilling drinks. My grandma was the main caregiver for my grandfather for over 5 years. However, it became too demanding and she could no longer keep up with his care requirements. Eventually, my family moved my grandfather into a nursing home to receive full-time care, where he passed away a couple of years later. While my family was still grieving the loss of my grandfather, my mum's hands started fidgeting. She travelled to Brisbane to complete a physical examination where the specialists were able to confirm that she had HD, although she was never genetically tested. When my mum was 47, she presented symptoms and became depressed shortly after. She separated from my father and moved out of the family home. A few months later, she could no longer drive due to the lack of her decision-making capacity and delayed responsiveness. However, she remained fully independent for an additional 2 years and moved into a community home where she would live in a unit semi-independently. My auntie and uncle were the main caregivers for my mum, as my older brother and I were still in high school at the time. My mum's physical abilities and emotional state progressively deteriorated, so my auntie contacted Huntington's Queensland, where they helped create her NDIS plan in advance. My mum's mental health became clear when she started having extreme mood swings and started making rude comments towards people. Her ability to walk unassisted was difficult, and her uncontrollable hand movements ended up extending to her full arm. Ongoing communication was established with an advisor from Huntington's Queensland for support, where they provided my family with more information. For example, they recommend using special equipment like a mobility walker and contacting specialists to help her with her slurred speech. My mum's condition also affected our public outings. I was often embarrassed to be with my mum when she had her mobility walker, as other students from high school would laugh and point at us. This made me very self-conscious about who I could trust, knowing my mum had HD without receiving any judgment. I was even conflicted on when or where we would go together and spend time with my mum. A few years later, my brother and I were lucky enough to get our own licenses, which gave us some flexibility when spending quality time with our mum. We preferred travelling to smaller local beaches or parks rather than the popular one to avoid the general public. Sometimes we even decided to eat ice cream in our car to avoid eating in cafes with people staring at us. Having someone to talk to who understood what caring for someone with HD was like helped overcome the fear of the public eye. An advisor from Huntingtons, Queensland helped remind me that what other people say, think and do isn't something we can control, and avoiding public spaces won't change this. This had inspired me to talk to strangers about HD rather than being ashamed. It was also nice to have someone that I could speak to who understood the challenges a young caregiver has. Eventually, as the years went by, my mum started having trouble eating, forgetting valuable information, and would often lose her balance and fall, leaving her slim body covered in bruises. While it was a difficult decision, my family moved my mum into a nursing home to receive full-time care. I was finding it difficult sometimes to even spend time with my mum, as after I graduated high school, I then became a full-time university student while also working part-time hours. And then in just the course of a few months, mum essentially lost all mobility and was bound to a wheelchair or bed. It was difficult to talk to her as she was unresponsive or struggled to speak at all. She became very fragile and thin, and from the suggestions from a HD advisor, she was provided ice cream, milkshakes and gravy to help improve her weight. It also helped that she loves Milo ice cream. One of the most remarkable moments with Huntingtons, Queensland was when they assisted my family in getting a specialised wheelchair for my mum. She had a tall, thin frame and would constantly slouch and slip out of a regular wheelchair. Thankfully, through the help of Mum's NDIS plan, we were able to order a specialised wheelchair which was actually able to be tilted back and also had both head and leg support. Mum was thrilled when she saw it, as she knew it would make travelling to doctor's appointments a lot easier and moving around inside of the nursing home. When Mum was at her final stages of HD, she would always try and make the most out of her days. She loved wearing colourful necklaces and would also have her nails painted a really bright colour. Purple was her favourite. If she was having a good day where her mind wasn't clouded, we would occasionally even play a game of Scrabble or do crosswords. At the end of her life, she struggled to keep any food or water down at all. My mum passed away at the age of 57 in August of 2019. Although this was a traumatic experience for me, Huntingtons, Queensland was there by my side the entire time. Before I share my testing process, please keep in mind that this is unique to my personal experience. If you are thinking of getting tested, please reach out to a genetic counsellor, your local HD association and your support system. Please also consider if you need to seek independent legal or financial advice beforehand. In Australia, you generally need to be 18 or older with a blood relative who's been diagnosed with HD to be genetically tested. This age limitation exists because the people seeking to be tested need the mental and emotional maturity to understand the significance of the testing process and what comes afterwards. I was a young child when I was told about my family history with HD, and I saw how it changed myself, my family, and my mum's care requirements. The experience inspired me to start researching HD online and listening to other stories. Outside of my family history, I considered being genetically tested to give myself clarity for any future career goals, financial preparation, or family planning needed. If I develop symptoms, I may need to retire earlier than the average person and may require additional care requirements, which could affect what savings I will need in the future. I also mentioned earlier that HD has a 50% inheritance rates, so if I was to be gene tested positive, I may explore IVF and/or prenatal genetic testing options and the cost involved to avoid a passing HD onto any children I may have. After considering this and what effects HD may have on my future, I made the decision to start my testing process shortly after I turned 18. I first booked an appointment with my local GP, who then referred me to Genetic Health Queensland. Following was an over-the-phone discussion with a genetic counsellor regarding my connection to HD, why I wanted to be tested, and the testing process itself. Part of the testing process included mandatory appointments with a psychologist to help mentally prepare for your results. For the genetic test itself, all that was required of me was a simple blood sample, which was done at the local hospital. After I found out my positive result, I vaguely remember the doctor telling me my CAG count, a measure of how many times the CAG portion of the HD strand repeats. As it was over 40, I will develop symptoms at some point in my life. With all of the preparation, I actually still went into major shock. When I got home after the appointment, I ended up being horrendously sick and returning to hospital later that day. They monitored me, confirmed I was in shock, ran a few tests just to make sure I was otherwise pretty physically healthy. The next few weeks were difficult. However, what was extremely helpful was my family and friends reaching out with empathy. I've been really fortunate to have a large support system I can rely on, and I've been able to stay in contact with my psychologist. After I tested positive, I also developed a deeper personal connection with Teresa from Huntingtons, Queensland, as I lived in Rockhampton at the time. And she would travel to regional towns in Queensland every few months to meet with people for HD support groups. After attending a few meetings, I was introduced to a few other local people who were carers or had loved ones with HD. About a year later, I was actually really surprised to learn that one of my old work colleagues' husband tested positive for Huntington's out of the blue. This strengthened our relationship, and I was able to speak with her daughter about my experience caring for my mum. Since testing positive, Huntingtons Queensland has also supported me as a young individual when I was being discriminated against in a workplace. Shortly before my mum's passing, we knew her health was rapidly declining, which became extremely stressful in my everyday life. I was asked to attend a meeting with the partners of the company where I was heavily questioned as to why my personal commitments was affecting my concentration and work performance. They were already aware that mum had a disability, but they didn't understand how serious it was. I explained to them that HD shares common symptoms with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and MND. I mentioned that I've been gene tested positive, however I'm asymptomatic and not likely to develop symptoms until I'm at least 45. After this meeting, I was let go during my probation period because they were only willing to train someone who would have long-term commitments with their company. Understandably, this made me furious. Thankfully though, the next day, I was lucky to speak with Teresa at the 2019 Huntington's Youth Camp. She confirmed that while I'm asymptomatic, I neither have to declare that I'm gene positive for HD or that I will have a disability in the future. Attending the youth camp held on the Sunshine Coast, I was extremely nervous. I hadn't actually met anyone before that besides Teresa. In just a few short days though, I had broadened my knowledge of HD, gained lifelong friends, and created a deeper connection with all of the Huntingtons Queensland staff. We had heaps of fun outdoor activities like paddleboarding, and even had the opportunity to speak with a specialist who was talking about clinical trials that were occurring at the time. One of the biggest rewards though from attending this event was being able to meet people similar in my age, because prior to this, I hadn't met anyone under the age of 25 who had a family with HD. Now I have many new connections and I've gained 2 amazing friendships. We even stay in contact frequently 2 years later. Since learning about the clinical trials, I wanted to stay up to date with all of the medical treatment and research around the world. I've been very lucky to join HD-CAB, which was created from Huntington's Disease Youth Organisation as well as the European and International Huntington's Associations. We are an advisory board for HD that has a global perspective made up from members of 6 out of the 7 continents. We meet with pharmaceutical companies to discuss ways they can assist the HD community by ensuring research is designed to meet the needs of HD patients and their families. As a group, we are also an advocate to governing bodies to make the drug accessible in every country across the world. Since researching and learning about the clinical trials, I also wanted to find a way that I could help the HD community further. So I decided to join HDYO's Ambassador Program, where I'm one of over 40 people around the world who help share awareness from a young person's perspective. We meet virtually every month by video conference and discuss several ways on how we can help the HD community and different ideas we share online. Recently, we've posted self-care tips that we've used for caring with our loved ones with HD. We've even started developing a personal connection with each other that allows us to be comfortable in asking those difficult questions. Like, how do you speak to someone you're starting a relationship with about HD? Further to becoming HDYO ambassador, I've also been volunteering for their engagement committee, where I'm able to plan, help, and share ideas for special events and programs. After the success of the 2021 Virtual Congress, we are now planning ahead for a bigger virtual event next year. As the Australian time zone is sometimes proven to be difficult, we were fortunate enough to schedule a special 2-hour time for Australia and New Zealand for our next Virtual Congress on the 6th of March 2022. In the Engagement Committee, we also create unique programs like mentorships in the United States and specialised talks such as juvenile Huntington's disease and having children. Since I tested positive, I knew that I wanted the Huntington's gene to stop with me. So I started researching IVF options online to understand how the process works with genetic testing. After my husband and I were married in September of 2020, we got a doctor referral and contacted Queensland Fertility Group to book an appointment. My husband and I met with our fertility specialist in January of 2021 and spoke about the overall IVF process, my genetic testing for Huntington's, and the PGT process in detail. After this, they required blood tests from my husband, my dad, and myself. Here, they were able to use my dad's DNA and compare it to mine, knowing that the other segments of the DNA would be my mum's to make it easier to highlight the Huntington's gene. They had to use my dad's DNA for this process as my mum had already passed away. For the next 5 months, they completed my genetic workup. This allowed the embryos to be sent away for genetic testing to determine if they do or do not have HD. In early July, I started my hormone injections, and then on the 16th of July, I had egg collection where they were able to collect 20. Out of the eggs collected, 9 matured and only 3 were fertilized. But unfortunately, no embryos were able to be used for transfer from my first round. My husband and I decided to have a break, which allowed us to save some money for a future round and also to become fully COVID vaccinated. At the beginning of the month, we met with our specialist again to start our second round of IVF. Hence, I may be a little bit emotional today if you speak to me because my collection is actually for Tuesday. I know that my Huntington's journey is just one of thousands of people around the world, that we all have unique experiences. But if it wasn't for the support that Huntington's Queensland provided me and my family, our experience would have been a lot more different and challenging. Since testing gene positive, HD has also changed my view on life, where I'm able to see a hopeful aspect in almost every situation. Through all of the negativity it may bring to a person's life, I always look for the memorable moments to cherish and reflect back on. I know that I've been incredibly lucky to have the opportunity to be tested and plan ahead for my future. And with medicine rapidly advancing, we may even have a cure for HD in my lifetime. Thank you all so much for attending and listening to my Huntington's journey.